Nerds on the Mic, where we discuss anything Nerdcore related, whether it's music, gaming, what's going on in the news for these topics, or comics, anime, manga, anything under the sun as related to nerd or geek culture. I am your host, Nick Fernbaugh, or Silver Ranch. And today is going to be a very centralized episode. It's going to be just a one-topic episode in which we discuss what it takes to kind of start off in... This could be even more generalized topic for just starting off in music, but I'm starting with Nerdcore music. So, you want to do music in this community, but you don't know where to start. I may not be the most qualified to do it, but I've thrown my hand in the ring a few times. I've done some tracks with some friends. I've done, like I said, I've done two or three Nerdcore tracks. I've done some cipher entries. I've even been I'm going to be in a cipher. In fact, I have a second one I owe to someone at some point next week. But you don't know where to start. So this episode is going to be kind of talking through how you get started with this sort of industry you want to go into. Whether if you want to do it as like a hobby on the side, be a little bit of a rock star, or you want to pursue it full time as like a career path. And like I said, this could be generalized to just regular music as well. So I'm not gonna just say this is the be all end all for this community and only this community. It's music. It can be used for any sort of range. So for starters, you want to get yourself set up on like all sorts of streaming softwares that you can release this music out to. So that's your Apple Music, that's your Spotify, that's your SoundCloud, that's your iHeartRadio, that's all those things. And you also want to get it set up on YouTube because, unfortunately, this is a business and YouTube is a very good place for a lot of music in the nerdcore industry to thrive because of AMVs. So that's the starting point. Make sure you get yourself like set up on all these accounts. And another tip to go into that is find something that makes you unique. It doesn't have to be specifically anime related. So for people who are wondering, how I started with the name Silver Ranch was Silver was like kind of like this personality I kind of had throughout my life, and it related to the character Silver Hedgehog from Sonic. Ironically, Sonic 06, which is one of the worst games of all time, but it stuck out with me so much. And one of the first songs I listened to that ever got me interested in like this community and I guess like more nerd culture as a whole was Dreams of Absolution, which was done by Crush 40. And actually, I think there were two versions of that song. I forget who made the second song version off the top of my head, but that's where I got Silver from. And then the ranch side was that I eat a lot of ranch, and I mean a lot. So much so to an inside joke was that during my junior year of high school, one of my friends gave me a shirt on like one of those white elephant gift exchanges that we all did, or like a Secret Santa, I guess is the more correct term. We did a Secret Santa, not a white elephant. We did a Secret Santa, and the shirt says, "I wonder if ranch thinks of me too." And at that point, I was like, yeah, it's only right if I add ranch into it. And so Silver Ranch was born. So the tip I leave for you guys is find that thing that makes you stand out. Like find that part of your brand that connects back to you. Make it feel authentic. Because people don't want to see fakeness in music. They want to see what you really are as a person. The next tip I can give is focus on it on more of the musical standpoint and not as much about the show, because music's a hard industry. And as I talked about, I in my final project I did for my history of hip hop, I found a study that showed that they surveyed 1,500 musicians and 73% of them were diagnosed with some form of mental illness. This industry's tough. It's high pressure. It's high stress. If you've ever listened to Rustage's Overflow album, you understand that this sort of industry is tough to be in, because it is a lot of mental battle, and in most cases you're going to be working on not as much on your own in the sense of like you're not going to have friends and family around you, but there's no label, there's no studio that like owns you. You're running by yourself, which means there's no one really to fall back on if you're struggling and need to kind of figure it out outside of like bouncing ideas off your friends. And that comes off, unfortunately, amateur sometimes. So you got to find that good balance between having your own personal freedom and having enough people around you to help build your brand up from the ground up to make you get better. The next tip I can give, and this is sometimes the hardest bit, a lot of people who are going to start working, they'll see things like FL Studio, Pro Tools, Ableton, and they'll want to go and like beg their parents, like, give me $200-$300, let me get Pro Tools, let me get Logic, let me get like all these things. But there are so many free softwares that can let you do the same things, maybe not to the same degree as like what these professional softwares can do. But some of the first songs I made, I used Audacity, GarageBand, and one that I still use today that I'm editing on my podcast off of, Reaper. It's a fantastic software. It is free, and it gives you so much that you can do. It's basically a diet version of what Pro Tools can do. And it's free. You don't have to spend $200 a year, or $300, I think is what actually Pro Tools is. I have the student version, which is $200. Or FL Studio, where you're spending $300. Like, you don't have to spend that money to get a lot out of it. And when you start making money, then you could say, okay, I want to invest in better mics. I want to invest in better software. So like a good example is, I'm worried it's going to mess up, but, oh wait, that's not the right mic. But give me 1 second for all the audio listeners. Make sure I don't choke myself out here. So I'm still not on the cusp of making money yet, but for everybody who's listening, I went over and I grabbed, for the longest time, the mic I'm speaking into for this video is a Blue Snowball. It is like $30-$40 online with a $10 sock I found on Amazon. Basically, it's a black basically sock that goes over the top. It's a pop filter, is what it is. Is the more musical term for it. But I recently this Christmas invested in a Shure SM58, as you all can see here. Or if you're listening, I just told you the microphone. If you don't know it, you know the name. It's a Shure SM58 that you can Google. It's the base standard of what most musicians use. It's a cardioid moving coil microphone that, like I said, it's good for starting out for vocals. It's very, it takes a lot. Like, it could take a lot of abuse, not by dropping it on the floor, but with what your voice can do. It's really good for heavier and thicker dynamic ranges where, say, like a Neumann TLM 170, which is I think it's a cardioid condenser. I hope it's cardioid condenser. I'm gonna get shunned by my audio teachers if I got that wrong. But the reason condenser mics are so nice is if you have more of a softer and, melodic voice. So if you're gonna do like heavy metal, you might rush this into an SM58. But if you're gonna run like a soft emotional pop track, you're probably not gonna run it through a 58. These are kind of little things you gotta think about while you're doing this. But when you're starting out, something like a Blue Snowball that's $50, like $50, you probably get that from your parents, most of you, for like Christmas or something like that, or your grandparents or something like that. It's all you need. Now, the computer's probably the hardest bit, and it's something that I know a lot of people don't usually have access to. So that'll be the one maybe hardest starting bit, is if you don't have a computer. But if you do, the rest of it is easily accessible through resources. And if you don't have one, I guarantee you probably have a friend who has one that you can reach out to and talk with if you're close. Or if you have a phone or an iPad, the other option is GarageBand. It's a free software that lets you just use the mics with internally. Now, I wouldn't recommend it because internal microphones in an Apple device is pretty bad. if you want to use voice memos is an okay software to use. But that's kind of what goes into the software side of the software / hardware side of things. You need a mic and you need a DAW is the basic starting points. And the main things when you go into making a track, you want to make sure that you don't clip. Now, what do I mean by if you don't clip? Well, when you track something, whether if it's vocals, whether if it's an episode, whether if it's gaming, you'll notice there's like a little sound bar you'll see. It goes from green to yellow to red. If that signal hits the red, you've clipped. Your sound distorts, and it comes off really nasty and ugly, and it's just an all-around bad sound. You don't want it. You don't want it in anything you track. So when you're doing tracking, and tracking is like doing takes for, say, you're laying down a verse for a hip-hop track, or say you're doing the vocals for a chorus. You want to be constantly looking, especially when you're starting off, at that sign to make sure it's like, okay, I'm not going over. If you are, then you need to lower the signal of what you're routing in there, or maybe you need to be a little further away from the mic. Sometimes it's just the position of where you're singing is the issue. The next thing I want to go into is just the overall mindset of when you do this. This is something I'm still currently working on. You have to be willing to put in the time for this. Music is not something that you can just drop one take, sit down at it for 10 minutes, and then be like, oh, here you go. You can do that, but nobody's going to listen unless you get really lucky. You have to put the time into it to make it sound good. And that's the issue here. Well, what sounds good? If it's going to fall on you as the independent artist to see where that is, and you might not have the best standards because of what you listen to, and you're not going to have the money to go to music school. I think a great starting point is YouTube. It sets a foundation for what you need, and when you start getting bigger, then you can start talking to professionals and seeing like where maybe you're lacking things that they understand better. Folks, life is about networking and reaching out, and don't be afraid to put something out there. If it sucks, there's this great thing called constructive criticism, folks. If all you see is people saying, oh, this is bad, this is garbage, shrug it off. Because most of these people, they aren't man enough to go out there and put out a track. They hate the sound of their own voice. Same way you probably do at times. Sometimes the hardest thing is being willing to accept that you don't like the sound of your own voice. I still hate the sound of my voice in music every time I edit. But you just get numb to it after a while. You realize, okay, I hate the sound of my voice, but just move past that. Does it sound good to me? Not do I like the sound of my voice sonically. Does this sound good? You have to think about that in music, especially in Nerdcore, because there's a lot of insecurities that come from this, because most of us are a little dorkier. We're not as much like, we don't as much run with the normal flow of like how everybody thinks they're confident with how they talk publicly and stuff like that. So you have to be willing to push aside your feelings of how you sound sonically. As long as you listen to it and you're like, I don't like the sound of my voice, but that mixes well with the instrumental I'm using. The next tip I want to give is for instrumentals. There are a lot of free ones on YouTube that you can use. The main term about it is that it's non-profit, so you have to keep that detail in mind to avoid lawsuits. When something is non-profit, it means you could throw it on YouTube, but you can't throw it on Spotify or all these other networks, because the thing about them is that they are non-profit. You cannot put those out there unless you own it. And how do you own it? You have to buy it, usually from a site like BeatStars. I think it's BeatStars is what it's called. BeatStars. It's a great place to get instrumentals and stuff like that. But the biggest thing about it is this point I'm going to say. They are not yours. You do not own that unless you pay for it. And then you have the royalties to use it and get paid. That's something people need to know, because if you just hawk someone's stuff off of internet through a YouTube to MP3 converter and throw it on YouTube and get paid, they'll know pretty quickly if you paid for the instrumental or not. And if they did, you just don't have this issue. But if you don't, you're catching a lawsuit your way for you and your family, because a lot of people start, as people saw in episode 2, the episode I did with O-Rain, I mean, he's only 15. Let's say someone like him or other people who are somewhere in high school, and they're just messing around with music because it's fun for them, and they screw around and get in a lot of trouble because, say, they took an instrumental off of a creator online and it said free, and their channel's big enough to where they can monetize it, and they monetize it. That gets them in trouble. Or say you put it on Spotify and you don't own it. That's how you get in legal trouble. So the reason I haven't put Dark Road or Fighting With Myself, which are my 2 big Nerdcore tracks, on Spotify is that I don't technically own those tracks. I put them on YouTube because I don't get paid for that. I'm not at the point where I'm high enough subscribers to get paid for that, so I don't get paid for it. But I keep those tracks because I'm allowed to do it, because they're free for nonprofit. Meaning I can use them and put them out online if I'm not monetizing it. So you gotta be able to see that if you're gonna use stuff off of YouTube in general. Now, if you have the money to spend, then I say spend it wisely and pick and choose with instrumentals. And this is gonna be the last detail I'm gonna give for people, and it's set deadlines for yourself. This is the hardest bit, because, like I said, you're independent, most likely in Nerdcore, meaning you don't have to set a standard for yourself. But think about the people who are towards the top of the game. So you're thinking Cam Steady, Game Boy Jones, Rustage, Fable, DPS, Connor, most of these people. I was about to say Connor Price. Connor Price is just an all-around awesome musician if you don't know who Connor Price is. But I talk about these Nerdcore artists in general because they're releasing bi-weekly. They're releasing once a month. They're releasing weekly. Dizzy is another great example. Dizzy releases weekly most of the time. So you want to set that standard for yourself. So say, I'm going to upload twice a month on Saturdays, or I'm going to upload once a week. And that's a YouTube thing, but it's also just a music thing. You need to set an online schedule so that way when you promote, people know, okay, I know every 2 Saturdays I'm going to go and take 10 minutes out of my day and listen to this artist sing because he's so good. So these are the important details to know. And I hope these tips and tricks are important, mean something to anybody who listens and wants to get into Nerdcore music or just music in general, because there's a lot of fun that comes out of music, and there's even a possibility of making some money on the side while doing it. But you have to be willing to put in the time, and you have to. Most people just don't know where to start. So I hope you take this podcast episode and use it as a starting point, because I think it's really important for people to know this, because there's a lot of gatekeeping in music. All of us are scared because anybody can come in. What we call weekend warriors, don't go to college, just listen to a bunch of YouTube videos, and they make a lot of great stuff, and it frustrates a lot of people. But the reason I leave out a few starting tricks is I leave out some starting tricks, and some of those things I learned from college. I didn't learn some of those things through YouTube. I learned some of these things through college, like music, like clipping. You're barely ever going to hear that in YouTube. You're just going to hear it. Don't make light go red. They don't say why, but they tell you just don't do it. So you do it, but you don't understand it. You have to understand stuff for it to make sense. So that's why I leave tips and tricks for artists, because I want people to be, the way I run things is I want to be successful, and I want to bring people up with me as that happens. So thank you for listening to episode 4 of Nerds on the Mic, where we went in deep detail on what it takes to start out in nerdcore and just in music in general. So I hope you all leave support, and if you found this helpful, please let me know. And just if you have any questions or if you just want to send something my way, you can reach out to me on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. However, and out of the way, this has been Nicholas Fernbaugh hosting Nerds on the Mic, and I'm signing off.